Uh, Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting. For those of you who don't know, I'm Phil King. I'm County Councillor for Gartree Division, which is in South East Leicestershire, and I'm also the chairman of the local pension committee for Leicestershire since earlier this year. So this is the annual general meeting. In case anyone has come into the wrong meeting of the Leicestershire County Council Pension Fund, you should have all had access to the papers for the meeting, which are published on the Pension Fund and County Council's website. If just to make you aware, the meeting is being broadcast live via YouTube, and so that'll be available for viewing and review after the meeting. So just to confirm, I've received apologies from Miss Helen Butler, Dr. John Bloxham, Mr. Manjit Singh Sayora, Mr. Vipul Betcher, and Mr. Daniel Grimley. And also, before we go on, I'd just also like to put on record my thanks to the previous chairman of the pension committee, Mr. Tom Barclay, who stood down at the county council elections in May, and some of you will have been aware of him being my predecessor in this role. So thanks to him for his long-standing stint doing that. But item 1 is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 9th of December 2024 to be approved. Can I just take that as they approved? Yeah, okay, that's great. And so item 2 is question time, and I can confirm that no questions have been received. Item 3 is questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5, and I can confirm that we've not received any questions from elected members. Item 4 is urgent items. There are no urgent items. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have a declaration of interest they need to make at all? I can't see anyone indicating, but if you do while during the meeting, please, you can do that later on if you need to. Item 6, which is the first substantive item, is the Pension Fund Annual Report and Accounts for 24-25. And this is on pages 13 to 146 of the agenda pack. Declan Keegan, who is Director of Corporate Sources, will introduce the presentation and is joined by Ian Howe, who's the Pensions Manager, Bulish Karchra, Finance Business Partner for Investments, and Kat Tui, who's Responsible Investment Analyst. And they will pick up their parts of the presentation, and this will be followed by a question and answer session. So over to you, Declan, first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the agenda's just popped up on the slide, which you can just about see. So we'll start off with just a quick run through some of the highlights for 24-25. It seems a long time ago, but it is the annual meeting for that financial year, which, like I say, is quite a bit ago. What is the LGPS? It will just give a quick reminder of sort of the features of the scheme and why it kind of is. It may be unique to any sort of like separate pensions that people hold. Pass over then to Ian, who'll sort of give us a bit of an introduction to the sort of the Leicestershire County Council scheme on the ground and how that operates. And then Ian will sort of take us through the administration side of the fund. Then Bulesh will pick up the pension investment side of how it works and how sort of the monies that sort of either the employers or the employees put into the scheme gets utilised. Then finally, Kat will finish off with the sort of the responsible investment and net zero strategy. So we could pass on to the first page. So this is sort of just showing the highlights for, like I say, for last year. And the first up, just sort of really positive news is people who've been to these over the sort of the course of time will have been seeing that kind of the funding strength improve. You know, go back to when I started getting involved in the fund, which was kind of the best part of 10 years ago. We were kind of like 75-ish, 76, which isn't great when you think that we're sort of holding the money to pay people's pensions. It was always going to pay because employers always have to sort of back those sort of future pension payments, but it is in obviously a lot better state if you've got the much higher funding level. So that's a big positive for the fund. Pooling progress, again, we've been after this for a few years. If you've been along before, you see now that's been gradually increasing. About 60% of the assets are managed by a firm called LGPS Central, which we're kind of one of sort of several owners of. The reason it's not at 100% is because some of the assets you make investment decisions years ago, they're just held by an asset manager, and you don't have a huge amount of options of what you do with it. It's either kind of basically hold or sell type opportunities. So there's not a lot for Central to do. So that will kind of keep increasing, and the government have set out full pooling as a deadline for March 2026. The reason you can do full pooling, it's just actually central won't change anything with those underlying investments. They'll just take over that sort of day-to-day management of it. So it's not full pooling as you might have envisaged as you think about it, but it is more that sort of the asset management companies, your LGPS Central, etc., do a bit more with it. The next slide, governance. It may sound a bit odd that we're talking about governance, particularly around the sort of the pooling side of things. It's been in place for a little while. The reason that governance has really come into focus, alongside government saying that you need to do more pooling, they're actually saying as well there's just too many pools. So there's kind of quite a bit of shifting going on. So this is going to be more of a highlight for 25, 26. But we do have quite a few funds from different pools who are going to join us because a couple of the pools are getting disbanded. So there's going to be quite a bit of sort of strengthening around that. It won't change anything on the ground, but it will help behind the scenes, and it should, in theory, over a long term, get sort of the cost of funds down. And climate targets, Kat will touch on, but sort of made really good progress on that. There's a kind of slightly strange phrase about climate aware investments, these sort of investments that are going to help towards kind of climate change. But in truth, quite a few of these we were doing anyway, even before we had targets. Forestry is a great example of that. It was seen as a good asset class, but actually it's become an asset class that's just become even more important as kind of people can get kind of carbon credits, etc., from it. But a lot of it is kind of, if you're doing the right thing as a long-term investor anyway, some of these things were happening. But Kat will get into this a little bit more. And also pick up about the sort of the responsible investment survey, which we did about 3 years ago. And it's useful to just understand, outside of climate change, actually where a member interests, what are the things that actually sort of matter, that you can't necessarily sort of you can't sort of skew away from our sort of fiduciary duty, that you want to make sure that kind of the fund does achieve the kind of the sort of a good level of sort of sustainability, that sort of good funding levels. You've got to maintain that. But it is useful to know where sort of members' heads are in terms of things that say they sort of view important, where you are sometimes you're making kind of marginal decisions around kind of going one way or the other. If the financial returns are similar, it may influence it at that sort of stage. Operational milestones talks about the AVCs. So we've got a new provider coming in there. We'll have to see how that sort of maps out with sort of Rachel Reeves, obviously kind of putting a bit of a cap on the sort of benefit of AVCs in a few years' time. But that will be a change for sort of both employers and employees if you sort of subscribe into those schemes. And then the final one, again, Ian will get into these a bit more, sort of the pension dashboard projects, which again, people often have sort of like pots of pensions left from either previous employers, employments, etc. It just makes things a little bit easier to pull all those together. So that's just a bit of a quick run through 24, 25. You'll see some of those themes come up on some of the future presentations sort of later today. So then moving into the next slide, what is the LGPS? I won't dwell too long on this. I think people are pretty familiar with it, because otherwise you wouldn't be here probably. But it's a national scheme. The rules are set by government, which is good on one side, and that it's copper bottomed in terms of sort of those assurance about the sort of that you're going to get your sort of your scheme benefits if you're an employee, because it is written into statute as opposed to one that we've got a lot of discretion. We have got a handful of bits and pieces of discretion locally, but not many in truth. It's still a defined benefits scheme. It can get a little bit confused between final salary and career average, and that's how LGPS has moved. It used to be final salary. More recently has got more into that sort of career average, which is kind of, again, a bit more of a predictable one for employers to deal with. And it's unlikely that sort of nature will change in the short term, that it's, again, like I say, it's statutory led, and it's key employee benefit across the whole of sort of local government, and including some of the administrative functions of places like fire and police, universities as well. We've got an awful lot of employers, 198, which is why that you'll hear the sort of phrase fiduciary duty come up an awful lot, because it's not just Leicestershire County Council or the employer that you work for sort of making those decisions. You've got to be mindful, the pension committee, the pension board, that they're looking after an awful lot of different people's monies at a whole range of different sectors, councils, academies, universities mentioned there, but there's quite a few private sector employers as well within the fund. MHCLG, as they do for sort of most things, Ministry of Housing, Community, Local Government, look after what we're doing. There's a board called the Scheme Advisory Board that does an awful lot of the sort of the day-to-day on their behalf and makes recommendations into it. It's also very heavily regulated. The pension regulator does have reasonable teeth, and they do keep an eye on sort of private sector and public sector schemes. And the way we deliver it in this sort of this framework is the two governance bodies we've got locally. We've got the local pension committee, which tends to lean towards the more investment side of the world, and the local pension board that sort of tends to, or is looking at, we're making sure we're fulfilling those sort of governance requirements. And Ian will touch on those in a little bit. So I'll pass over to Ian, who'll take us through an introduction to the Leicestershire County Council Pension Fund.
Thank you, Declan. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ian Howe. I'm the pensions manager for the Leicestershire Fund. So just to continue from where Declan got to there. So the governance of the LGPS, there's two requirements. There's a board and a committee. And that's the same for Leicestershire as it is for every other LGPS fund in the UK. So the committee is chaired by Councillor King, who's today's chair. They have the delegated authority for the fund. They're made up of elected members and scheme member reps. There are 10 employee representatives, including a university representative who's here today, and 3 non-scheme member representatives. And as Declan said earlier, their principal aim is really around the investments and ensuring the safeguard of the interests of the scheme members around the financial side. Then we have the board. That's chaired by Mr. Singh Saroya. We have 3 employee representatives, they're elected members, and 3 scheme member representatives. And the board's role is to assist the administration of the fund primarily and to affect the efficient governance and administration of the scheme. So the admin authority is effectively ourselves. We as the Leicestershire County Council Pension Fund, we are the administering authority, so Leicestershire County Council. Our responsibility is the calculating and paying of all scheme member benefits. So that's retirements, death benefits, etc. Employers joining and leaving the scheme. So we have a statutory duty to ensure that any employer that joins the scheme follows the legal contractual arrangements in doing so. And when an employer leaves the scheme, to ensure that all requirements are met by that employer when they leave. We also have to ensure all the regulation changes are followed correctly. Regulation changes come kind of in waves. Sometimes you don't have any regulation changes for a few months, and then sometimes you can get quite a few come through together. So it's always monitoring those and ensuring that they're then actioned. Other statutory requirements for ourselves, year end, we go through a year end process, which is very vigorous. And that is designed to ensure that we meet the statutory requirements to get annual benefit statements out to scheme members by the 31st of August every year. But it's also important because that's also used then, and that information feeds through to the actuary for the fund valuation, which obviously sets the employee contribution rates, which I'm sure many of you are here to hear about, particularly today, because that's obviously a key requirement and only takes place every 3 years, and this is one of those years. And then there's the governance side, which is we take board reports to both board and also committee, but predominantly the pension board. Some fund statistics, just to give you an idea of the membership. So this shows the last 3 years, at 31st of March 23, 24 and at 25. And we have that broken down by 3 different groups. So the active contributors, people who are actually paying into the scheme currently. Preserved members, they're people who have left the scheme but aren't yet old enough to claim their pension benefits. So those benefits are frozen, preserved as we call them, and pensioners. You can see over the 3 years, active contributors continue to increase, but sort of stabilised a little bit in the last year, sort of fairly static numbers. Preserved members, similar in actual fact. Pensioners, though, continues to increase. They're the number that are increasing the most, and more people are actually claiming pension than we've had in the past. I've now got nearly sort of coming up to 36,000 pensioners. And we've got a total scheme membership of just under 110,000. So it's a large scheme, large amount of members. These are some administration statistics in the last year up to 31st of March 25. So these are the areas of work that we complete. I won't touch on every single one there, but just to kind of pick out a few of the key ones. Preserve benefits, as I say, they're people who've who've left but aren't yet old enough to claim the pensions. Nearly 2,500 of those. Nearly 3,500 retirements in a year. So you can see that, as I say, the retirements are really, really increasing. And I think probably the other one to pick out is the aggregations. That's where members are combining benefits. So that's where members have moved employers. So you can still see there's quite a significant amount of members who are moving employers, or even still within the same employer, but moving to different roles within that employer. So we've had nearly 5,000 of those in a year. So we've got a team of about 42 people in pensions, and you can see from the numbers that the statistics are high. We've got a lot of work coming through the section at any one time. These are the key performance indicators for the year 24-25. Now, when I've sat here in the past 12 or 13 years when I've done this here at Leicestershire, pretty much every time I've shown this slide, it's always had green arrows pointing upwards. This year, up to 31st of March, you'll see there's some red arrows pointing down, which is where we've not met target. And those three in particular that I wanted to point out is the top one on the left, retirement and benefits notified to members. We have a target of 92%, and we achieved under that. We achieved, I think I can read that, is that 80? I think that says 80 up there. Death benefits, we have a target of 90 and we only achieved 61%. So you can see that we were really hit hard in this year. Workloads were incredibly challenging, but it was compounded by McLeod. McLeod really, really, really hit us in 24-25. And for the benefit of members who maybe aren't as close to this as others, McLeod was the government regulation changes which made us go back and revisit pensions back to 2014. So anybody who qualified under what we called a McLeod underpin, which was comparing the career average to the final salary benefits, which was a regulation that government brought in October and then backdated to April 2014, really, really impacted on us. So you can see why we were really up against it in that year. That said, I have got some statistics from where we are this year, and I'm pleased to say those numbers are back to where we should be. So the retirement benefits are now back to over 90%. Death benefits are getting closer. They're up to about 85%. And pension payments within 10 days are over. Now they're at 96%. So we have pulled it round, but I will be honest, it was a challenging year, 2024-25. Looking ahead, as Declan touched on earlier, pension dashboards, I'll talk about that. And also I'm just going to mention about the consultations that are currently, or one is still active, one is closed, about the scheme changes potentially moving forward. So dashboards, just for the benefit of members who may not be aware of dashboards, this is a new government initiative to allow anybody in the UK to register and be able to view all of their pension benefits in one place. So you can actually go online. Once you've gone through all the security checks, you will then put information in about yourself, and that will then fire off information to all the pension schemes. And if there's a match at those schemes, that information will be pulled back and it will give you all your information about pensions in one place. It's going to be a really, really, really clever tool, and it will help people re-engage with lost pensions, because there are people who've moved jobs and lost pensions. They just lost track. They've not kept the pensions provider up to date of where they are. This will relink those people back to those pensions. We had to register and link into this system by October. We've done that. So all the testing, all the work, and all the background information has been done. The reason this is looking ahead, it doesn't go live until October 26. But you will start to hear about this because the government are going to start pushing this. They're going to start getting more and more employers engaged as well, because ultimately they want to engage with every employer, so every pension is available for people when they look for it. Our information is now ready. We've still got to do some work on AVCs, but we've made that link. So dashboards is going to be a big project for us moving into this coming year. Next slide. The other area I wanted to just talk on is the consultation on access and protections. There are a number of changes, regulation changes that are being proposed. I've picked out 4, but there are plenty more than this. But these are the 4 that I've particularly picked out as interest to both scheme members, employers, and councillors. So the first one, the minimum retirement age is increasing from age 55 to 57 in April 2028. So if somebody was to leave the scheme, already has left the scheme and has a preserved benefit, they may have thought they could have claimed that at 55. Those rules are going to change. So that's now going to be 57 from April 28. Now, government are going to offer some sort of protections for people who've already got benefits in certain schemes. Those protections appear to be quite complex, and they are still a consultation at the moment. But predominantly, the change is that when you reach 57, you will be able to claim your benefits from 2028 rather than 55. There's also a change to a proposal that councillors and mayors will be able to access the LGPS from April 26. The councillors used to be in the scheme, and then it was closed to councillors, and this is effectively reopening that regulation. So from April 26, we may have councillors and mayors joining the scheme again. Message to employers who are here: if you have councillors at your employer, just check your payroll systems to ensure that your payrolls can readmit those councillors back into the scheme. And just a technical point, they don't fall under auto enrolment either, so you do need to check your payroll systems to ensure that's working correctly. We have written to the employers about that, so just for an awareness. Another one about academy consolidations. At the moment, when an academy consolidates, and this happens because academies are larger and larger, and multi-academy trusts now have academies in multi-funds. So you could have some in the Nottinghamshire fund, some in Derbyshire, some in Leicestershire, across borders. They're removing, or the proposal is to remove, the Secretary of State, which will mean funds and those academies will effectively make it easier to allow academies to bring all of that under one umbrella. There is some sort of rules around what is deemed reasonable within that, and it can't be deemed just to be a contribution sort of shopping exercise. So if academies have different employer rates at different funds, you can't just use this as an opportunity to try and find the cheapest rate, because it might be for 3 years, but the following we're moving the other way again. So it's not about that, but it is a potential change that academies particularly will be interested in. And the final one I just wanted to mention is New Fair Deal, which is, I think, potentially really quite good, this one. This is actually basically designed to give greater protection to people who have work outsourced and their LGPS benefits are then more easily protected. The proposal is to move away from the broadly comparable arrangements, so they will cease, they will no longer exist. And the way that it's kind of designed is it will reduce the pension risk for scheme members, because the employer they'll move to will be deemed a deemed employer. So effectively that link will remain, so it will remove the admission agreement legality as well. So it'll make it easier and potentially possibly cheaper. So that is, I think, going to be quite welcome, but watch this space as this gets finalised. Next slide. That's all I was going to say, but if anybody does have any quick questions, happy to take some. All right. Yeah.
Ian, you mentioned the difficulties you had with the McLeod and the in terms of the administration, but there's a couple of things really coming up, which is the salary sacrifice arrangements that are changing, and particularly the inheritance tax inclusion of pensions. How are you going to be able to cope with that in terms of your administration? Taking
those in turn, thank you, Nick. Salary sacrifice, I don't think will be a major impact on us, in truth. It'll only really impact on those employers that have the AVCs through salary sacrifice currently, Nick. And we only have 6 at the moment. There are some more actually in the pipeline, but I think the impact on us generally will be quite minimal. I think it'll have a bigger impact potentially on the employers, Nick, that one, than us. Okay. So I don't think that one is a particular concern that I have from a fund angle. The inheritance tax point is a better question, not a better question, sorry, that sounded rude, I beg your pardon, a more tricky question. I think that will have greater impact on us. I think we shall see what the devil is, the devil in the detail, because at one point it seemed like we were going to be doing a lot more on this. Then it seemed to sort of wane the other way, and now it seems to be coming back a little bit. So I'm not quite sure exactly where this is going to pitch, Nick. But if it does mean that we end up having to take on that sort of responsibility, it does concern me that we could end up potentially slowing up death benefits, which could potentially be a negative. And I think that's been recognised when they've seen the consultation, but I don't think it's been thoroughly considered all the way through to the end result. So I think that's one I'm going to watch more carefully. It does give me some concern, but less than but more than the salary sacrifice, Nick. Is that all right?
Yeah, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Chairman. Ian, just a bit of feedback on that, if I may. So in terms of McLeod, we're of course we're only interested in our own scheme, which is really important, and you highlight some red points there as a result of that. But if we took a holistic view of surrounding schemes, both locally and nationally, you'd find what I've seen is a much worse position in the red than what we are. That doesn't mean I'm not trying to say the red is a good thing. All I'm just saying is trying to be realistic and saying that it's been well managed and moving forward. So I just wanted to make that point. In terms of the digital dashboard, absolutely fully support that, of course, and it'd be beneficial for employers and members. My concern, and probably a short answer would be helpful, is just about that digital divide, about somebody who's either doesn't have access to, or through illness or whatever, or disability, would never be able to access it under the digital system. So it's that small percentage we always try and get to that are left behind. That was a question on that. Thank you. Tiny bit confused about the consultation. Whilst I would urge employers and members to consult on that consultation, because there's some very critical points there. Parts of it, as far as I understand, that's what I'm seeking clarification on. The 55 to 57, even though it's in the consultation, that's now no longer up for debate, or is it? Could that be changed, is what I'm saying, as a result of the consultation? Because I thought that was going to happen anyway. You can make your point on it, but I don't know whether it will actually change that. And the last point is regarding councillors. I've been around long enough to have been in the scheme for a very short period of time and then chucked out of it. Ironically, at the same time that the government of the day introduced that everyone had to go into a pension scheme except councillors. So on that point, I'm quite welcome it coming back. That's just, literally, it's not a political point. It's just an observation, because that's what's actually happened.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Ian, do you want to answer that?
Sure, yeah.
Before you do, just I forgot to mention earlier, if anyone wants to raise any questions, just raise your hand and I'll ask you to speak. And if you just say your name, that'd be helpful as well, and what you're who you're representing.
Apologies, yeah.
Sorry, I should have said that right at the beginning, but that's my remiss. So, Ian, over to you.
Apologies on me, Councillor Martin Cartwright, representing the 7 districts as a member.
That's great, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, in terms of those 3 points, dashboards, totally agree. There will be some people that will not want to engage or can't engage. I guess that's a question for government ultimately, because government want to do dashboards. We have our own online system at the moment. We won't change that. And if people don't want to use that, we provide them paper, and we will continue to do so. So from our perspective, we will address it. But from a national picture, they may not be able to use dashboards. The normal pension age, I guess the consultation is primarily looking at the consultation around protection. Because as you say, government have initially said they're going to do this. Protection is the key point, isn't it? What protection are they going to offer those people who are still able to get it at 55. And the councillors, take your point, councillors were in, they were out, they're back in, potentially. But it seems as though that one is going to happen, I think. We will deal with that, and we will deal with the administration that comes from that.
Do you want to carry on with your presentation, Ian, or have you finished your bit? You're done. So have we got Bullish? Yeah. Do you want to carry on then? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ian. We'll start with our current investment goals. So you can see a graph at the bottom of that page there that covers the fund value in billions over the last 10 years. We'll go back to the top, and the fund takes a very long-term view of investment return. So we don't take changes to our investment strategy lightly. We don't certainly make changes for where the market might be in a year's time. We have continued commitment to responsible investment beliefs. We do have a comprehensive net zero strategy, which was approved more than 2 years ago now at the Pension Committee, following some successful consultation and engagement. We annually reassess our investment returns, and we bring those proposals to a January committee each year. Our advisor is Hymans Robertson, and they assist us with putting that presentation together to committee. The fund does have huge diversification, and we're trying to balance all the risks and whilst trying to manage volatility and simplify the fund at the same time. So the fund is at the 31st of March around £6.7 billion. At the latest estimate, it's around £7 billion. We now have far fewer managers within the fund than we did 5 years ago, for example. It gives us a lot more focus, but it's still heavily diversified with at least 20 managers in the fund. This next slide looks at our investment returns, and the graphs and the tables essentially say the same thing. What we've got in the first bar chart on the left is discrete annual performance. So by year to the 31st of March each year, starting at the year ending 31st of March 2021. And what you can see here is we've got great returns that first year, not so great returns at the last year ending 31st of March. And the two bars tell us what we actually achieved. That's the first bar of the pair, if you like. And the second bar is what we expected to achieve given the investments we held and the targets we expected for that investment. There's a very barren year in the middle there. So that's that year 22-23 where most of the markets really suffered. So that was the year when inflation shot up and equity markets were pretty much down 20%. The fund in that year was down minus 1.3% in total across all its investments. What we have got in the bar chart beneath that is cumulative performance. Now we don't look at 1 year performance. It's very volatile in that respect, but for longer term performance, we've got the 3 year and the 5 year there. And the only thing I'll bring to light here is the 3 year performance is 4.2% per year for each of those 3 years on average. We expected to get a bit more. We expected to get 5.6% per annum. And the rationale behind that is, or the reason for why it isn't as high as we expected is we've got a couple of things going on here. We've got a reset of our target. So for each of our investments, we reset what we thought we should achieve. And what that meant is we've made it a bit harder for ourselves. We've said, instead of thinking we'd get market returns, we think we should get market returns plus 3%, for example. So that's part of the reason why we're behind over 3 years. But we've also got a number of asset classes that haven't achieved what we thought they'd do. Private equity is a prime example. Over the last 3 years has returned very little for us, whereas we'd expected double-digit returns. So there's a couple of reasons there. But over the long term, the 5 year graphs, you can see we've achieved 8.8% per year on average versus a very similar benchmark. I'll pause regularly if there are any questions rather than having to go all the way back. So feel free to put your hands up at any point. This next bar graph shows us what our investment allocation is, and what it's really saying is we're very diversified. You can see all the different asset classes there, and within each asset class, we've got, in many cases, multiple managers as well, doing nuanced different things within that asset class. The graph on the right shows our progression over time, and we've got 3 bars there in every case. We've got The biggest bar, the light green bar, is what we deem the growth asset group. So this is the most risky parts of the scheme, listed equities in there, private equities in there. And what you can see is over time, we've decreased that slightly. So you can see the first part there is in 21, 22, the allocation to growth was 60 odd percent. And it's slightly reducing over time as we've taken a bit of risk off the table and added allocation to that middle bar, which is the income group. And within that income group, we've got assets or investments such as infrastructure, private credit and property. Slightly less risky, provides more reliable, regular income returns. So where is our current funds target allocation? So it's a bit messy, this, and feel free to put your hands up if you've got any questions here. But what we're showing here is in that first table in the top right, our growth investments. So listed equity, target return and private equity are in there. So these are the riskiest, most volatile investments, the ones that we'd expect to get the biggest returns for. And you can see in the third column across what our target allocation is to those investments. So I'll read them out because it's relatively small there. Listed equity, we expect to have 41% allocated there. We have roughly 41%. Targeted return, we expect to have 5% in there. We've actually got 5%. Private equity, 7.5%. We've actually got 6.1. That's the first of our asset classes where we've got slightly less than we'd expect, but largely that growth asset group, we've got the right amount of money in. That next group, which is the table underneath that, shows our income asset classes. We've got 4 in there: infrastructure, private credit, property, and what we've called liquid multi-asset credit. So effectively debt or credit. We're underweight in these areas as we try and build up our exposure here. The last column in that block there showed, the millions that we're behind. So infrastructure about 94 million behind, global private credit about 160 behind, property a smaller number, about 20 million behind, and then global credit, liquid multi-asset credit about 177 behind. That's the only asset group where we're behind on. Protection in the top right, we're pretty much bang on there. And the next slide shows us what are we doing to try and get that balance right again. Now, these are our uncalled commitments. So to infrastructure, private credit and property, we need to make commitments to managers. And then when they've got investments to make, they call for that money. We've currently got over £1 billion worth of uncalled commitments. So as these commitments are called, that gap between growth and income will shrink. Our cash balances will shrink and the money will end up in those income asset classes. So moving on, this is a slide showing where our money is invested with our pool, LGPS Central. Declan mentioned earlier, LGPS Central is the part-owned investment company that the administering authority has a 1/8 share in. And we can see that we've invested with LGPS Central over the many years it's been in existence now, coming up to 7 or 8 years, across most asset classes. So we've got exposure with LGPS Central in listed equity, private equity, infrastructure, private credit, multi-asset credit, investment grade bonds. So all the major asset classes have been developed with LGPS Central alongside our partners. And there's probably more than a dozen investments that we could still invest in with them. The pie chart on the right, the pie chart on the right just shows our total mix split between central funds. That's the light green, so about 43%. Legal and General, who manage our passive equities, but that allocation is also managed by Central. So the 43% with Central, the 17% with Legal and General, that's that 60% we talked about, which is pooled. Then we've got a fairly large slug left over, which is the locally managed investments. So these are these legacy investments that we've made many years ago that in many cases are in runoff. And as money gets returned, we can reinvest that money with LGPS Central funds. Final slide from me. We'll have heard that there's a lot of consultation and changes going on in the LGPS arena. We are waiting for government's finalised pensions bill and any supplementary regulations. But what we've got here on this table is 5 key changes that have been proposed, and the effect on the Leicestershire fund, and to be fair, we've got similar effects across the country, across all LGPS funds. I'll read those out. They shouldn't take too long, but the fund will still retain strategic asset allocation responsibility. So that's the rough allocations that we have to listed equity, private equity, etc. We still retain that responsibility here, but we delegate the implementation of that strategy to LGPS Central going forward. The next one there is the fund sets its own investment strategy. So that's the investment strategy statement and the funding strategy statement. There's no real change here. We did this previously. We still do this going forward, but we will rely heavily on LGPS Central being the primary investment advisor. The third one there is to transfer all to LGPS Central, our pool, management and oversight of all our funds, £7 billion worth of assets by the 1st of April 2026. So this is one of the bigger changes. Currently, internal oversight occurs at the fund, but that will pass to LGPS Central, who are building up a team ready to be able to do this. The fourth one in there, and the fund must set within its ISS local growth plans. So this is how we're going to spend pension money. So the 7 billion, what proportion to investments which are purely within the pool's footprint. The pool currently consists of 8 partner funds, roughly within the central region. We're adding 6 or 7 more as the Brunel funds and the Access funds have been disbanded. Those 21 local authorities which are part of those pools have decided to join up with other pools, and Central are likely to take on about 7 of those. And the last one there is instill best practice and governance recommendations. This is purely a continuation of guidance, which is always being updated. I'm happy to take any questions, but yeah, that's the last of my slides.
Thank you, Bullish. Has anyone got any questions for Bullish? No? Okay, we'll move on to Kat then. Oh, sorry. Can you just say your name, please, and where you're representing?
Hi, I'm Andrew Stewart. I'm the Employee Representative Reserve for the Pensions Board currently. My question was really around how are we protecting investments in Leicestershire around the economy? You talked about the pooling arrangements, but investing it back into Leicestershire and those kind of things. Is anything in the plan to protect that at all?
So if I've understood the question correctly, to reinvest back into Leicestershire, that's that fourth slide. Sorry, the fourth point that was on that last slide around we've got to set out local growth plans within the investment strategy statement. So we can't direct money directly to Leicestershire, but within the footprint of the 15, there will be something within our investment strategy statement to say how we want to spend the money, how much we want to spend, and which areas that we're happy to spend in. So that is something that we will take on. Can't direct primarily to Leicestershire though.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Is any other points? No. Kat, do you want to move on then? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So yeah, I'm Kat Toohey, Responsible Investment Analyst for the Pension Fund. So I'm just going to take a few minutes kind of to walk you through what responsible investment means for the fund, the progress the fund has made, and how your input's going to help shape what we do next. So when we talk about responsible investment for the fund, we mean an approach that integrates environmental, social and governance factors into our investment decisions. And we do this to better manage risk and deliver sustainable returns. This is quite distinct from ethical investment, which would be where moral considerations would take priority over investment returns and financial factors. So if I just kind of take one example of how we kind of consider responsible investment, it's by managing climate risk. So we consider this in 2 ways: physical risks, where events such as extreme weather or flooding may impact our physical assets like infrastructure or property. And there's also transition risks, so the changes that come from moving to a lower carbon economy, and the uncertainty within global markets when there may be different governmental policies and approaches, as well as different energy scenarios. While there are obviously risks, these can also present investment opportunities, and this is something the fund has considered for a number of years. So on this slide, it kind of takes us through a bit of a journey so far of what we've been up to. So Declan mentioned at the start, the fund has investments in forestry. We began this in 2011 as part of the fund's diversified portfolio. This isn't just good for the planet, but it provides the fund with stable investment returns. We then joined the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum in 2019. We did this to help strengthen our collaborative stewardship, as we believe we can make more meaningful impact together with our peers. And that's something that most LGPS funds across the country are part of. In 2020, the committee, the Local Pension Committee, approved the first Responsible Investment Plan and published its first climate risk management report, which talks about how we manage climate risks and consider that within our approaches. This was followed up by the development of the net zero climate strategy. We engaged with scheme members on this back in 2022 and 2023, and we had kind of very widespread support in this, and committee subsequently improved that strategy. At the same time, the fund has made tangible investment in climate-related strategies, as mentioned before. So these tilt away from carbon-intensive companies towards those generating green revenues, all while investment performance has continued to be positive. So these positive actions have resulted in strong performance against the fund's net zero targets. And we've achieved, if I go on to the next slide, we've achieved both 2030 interim primary targets for our in-scope investments, set as this slide. In plain terms, what this means is that if governments, for example, introduced a carbon price or a carbon tax, companies with high emissions would face higher costs and lower profits. And by reducing our exposure to this, we've made the fund more resilient. We also have 75% of our in-scope emissions are either aligned or aligning with the Paris Agreement or under engagement with our partners, LGPS Central. And this shows strong progress on our stewardship and engagement, and we're working with Central to go further with this and show how we are meaningfully engaging with these companies. So the fund has come quite a long way since it started work with responsible investment. However, for the first time, we're looking to hear your views on the fund's approach to investment in relation to environmental, social and governance factors more broadly, as well as a follow-up to how we manage climate risk as part of the fund's net zero climate strategy review. So the survey is open until the 5th of January. You can find it on the Pension Fund website. And then we're hoping, and then we'll present results to committee and use it to help shape policy and how we prioritise our engagement with our investment managers and LGPS Central. So I'll leave it there if there's any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Kat. Has anyone got any questions they want to ask? Is it Mr. Sims? Yep.
Hello, my name's Rupert Sims. I'm attending as a member. I'm wondering, I suppose, a twofold question, if you're able to give a concrete example of how engagement with a company has led to a successful result and influenced that company in the intended way, and are you also able to provide examples of a decision to change your investment approach in response to an attempt to engage that hasn't been successful?
Kat, are you able to answer that now?
So it's probably hard for me to give a concrete example straight. I can, after the meeting, maybe have a chat and I can give you some links to when we, because essentially LGPS Central and the Local Authority Pension Fund Forum engage on our behalf. So they'll have the examples of engagement. One thing I think that will be really important going forward with LGPS Central is how we are showing meaningful engagement, because that is something that's always kind of the challenge. How do you show you're being effective? But I suppose one of the kind of key principles of how we consider engagement is if we didn't own a company or something like that, someone less responsible than the fund could own them. So it's kind of keeping that pressure on a company to show we care about these things, and it's important that companies take them into account. And we just have to make sure Central feed that back into their investment managers and through all their processes. But I can give you some kind of links after. If that's helpful.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I think the answer is some specific examples. There are some, and we do get those reported to us. So I think that can be sent, given to you after the meeting, if that's okay.
Thanks. Yeah, I didn't quite catch all of your answer, but thank you. I'll speak to you after the meeting.
That's okay.
And there was a second part of the question was whether you have examples of engagement
Yeah.
having not been
Yeah, I think that's included in the reports we get, where they report back when it hasn't been successful and then what the out. So sometimes it, so there are some subtle changes that then happen. So I think we can get, Kat can give you those examples, and you can, and they are reported on a regular basis. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, sorry, just to add, Educare Central have an escalation framework. So they'll have, I think they have 4 or 5 stages, and that could lead to divestment in circumstances where there's significant financial risk, but there's other steps ahead of that. So they might vote against a chairman, or write a letter to the company, and kind of kind of do a shareholder resolution, which is against the company, and companies often try to avoid that because it kind of it looks quite bad in the media on the company. So that tends to be a spur to get the company engaging.
So I think, okay, I think there are examples that can be provided to you, which you can then look at and then feedback on. That's great, thank you. So if we can move on to, if there are no more questions, if we can move on then to item 7, which is the report is obviously been concluded. It is the Hymans Robertson valuation presentation, and I'm going to welcome Tom Horay and Richard Warden from Hymans Robertson, who are the pension fund actuaries, to today's meeting for the presentation. They will take questions during the presentation, apparently. So over to you both. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We're mindful of the time as well, and also mindful there's an employer forum after this for those who are staying on. So we're going to go into a bit of the weeds and a bit more detail on this. This is very much a high level overview. Appreciate the time. We just, so we'll kind of just rattle through this. Just to pick up on Declan mentioned a moment ago, I think earlier, about deficits. We had a period of deficit management in the fund, LGPS, 20-25 years of deficits. The last valuation, we had a small surplus in the Leicestershire fund. We've now got good news, a stronger surplus, a stronger fund position. So we're now kind of this period now of surplus management. That's quite an important point, and the theme here is about how do you manage surplus compared to deficits. Deficits all about keeping rates affordable. Surplus is all about what do you do with that surplus? Do you hold some back, and how might rates change and hopefully go down for employers? So next slide. Yes, here's the agenda. I'll do a little bit of talking, pass to Tom. We'll just cover these through. First of all, just one slide on the timetable. Here we are. Lots of ticks, which is good news. We're at the employer results report, and we've gathered the data. We've set assumptions. We've talked to the committee. We've got a draft funding strategy statement ready. Going out to, I think it's already gone out to all employers. So today is all about just, talking about where we are. We're at the employer results reporting stage. And once that consultation finishes, because it has to be consulted on with employers, the rates will be finalised, the funding strategy statement will be finalised, and it will all be captured in a final report March next year, March 2026. And that will contain something called a rates and adjustment certificate that details all the contribution rates payable the 1st of April 2026 for the next 3-year period. So move swiftly on to the slide 6. Yeah, it's very well. I won't spend giving the time too much in this. Basically, why do we do it? Well, it's a health check and evaluation. We have to for compliance reasons. It's basically a chance to review that key document, the funding strategy statement, and of course, the output is, to calculate employer rates. Let's move on to the next one. Question is, okay, why do we do it? Well, how do we do it? Lots of data gets fed in. Lots of assumptions. We have to calculate liabilities for every single member and every single employer, all the members within employers. We need a stack of assumptions there. Some are financial, some are demographics, like people living longer. What to be mindful of the funding and investment strategy. We've talked about that already this morning. The two speak to each other when it comes to the valuation. And of course, the benefit structure that I think Ian covered earlier on, need to reflect that benefit structure. Final salary bits and the care bits too. Here's me and Tom in the middle. We've got the factory up in Glasgow where we do the calculations. So we get all that data, all those assumptions, and do the number crunching and produce reports. And then there's the outputs on the right-hand side. So each employer will get an individual employer result schedule, so you have your own tailored schedule showing your own results. Get a copy of this updated funding strategy statement, which has been subject to change at this valuation. So you'll get a draft of that, and that gets consulted on alongside the rate. And then I mentioned that final valuation report we'll do, which will sign off typically in March 2026. Just moving swiftly on. This is a little bit busier, this one. It's just kind of explaining the fact that it's a bit like a balance sheet. You'll be used to any accountants, liabilities and assets. It's the same in pension funds as well. So we've got liabilities, we call them, there's two types. There's the benefits earned to date, past service benefits up to the valuation date. So that's all stuff already accrued that members are due. That's a little green left-hand box there. And then we've got the assets today on the right-hand side. So the assets are currently held by the fund, are kind of held against those benefits. But of course, we can't forget about the future. Still got lots of benefits to be earned going forward by active members and new entrants. And that's that line green box. And then, of course, to fund all those liabilities, we rely on only two things, very simply. We rely on future contributions for employers and employees, and we rely on future investment returns, which are hopefully positive and have been, as Bullish explained, have been good in recent years. So we're relying on that too. And evaluation is all about getting a balance between investment returns and contribution rates. So it requires a bit of management. Maybe move on now to the next one. Just one slide, again, lots of details that lie behind these assumptions. We'll cover this a little bit more detail in the forum, but there's all the assumptions in kind of in order of priority. The ones that have got the highest, most material impact at the top, feeding all the way down. We've got investment returns. That's a key one. See there, it's gone up, that expectation. That's its assumption. Hasn't been earned yet, that money. It's forward looking, but the assumption of this valuation is quite a bit higher than the last valuation. And that's even with a higher level of attached to that assumption too. Benefit increases, talked about inflation forward looking, we've had a dose of inflation, but forward looking inflation is higher, and so on and so forth. All these assumptions there, again, in limited amount of time to talk through them. So let's move on to the next slide. And this is, I think, Tom, you might just.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And I'll maybe just pause very briefly. I know that we're going at a rate of knots here, but for any employers, that the valuation predominantly is a really important exercise, of course, for the fund, but also for the employers. We know employers are here that maybe got questions on their rates, questions on the funding strategy. We're going to spend a lot of time in the employer forum, which is immediately after the AGM. So I do apologise for the speed that we're going through, but I appreciate it's just to find the right balance there. But I will pause just briefly in case there is any questions on what Richard's mentioned so far.
I can't see any. Carry on.
Yeah,
Can you just switch your microphone? Thank you.
So just picking up on Richard made this point earlier, and I think a few of the officers as well have touched on this. So on the left hand side, this was 3 years ago when we did the last valuation. There was a small surplus. You can see down at the bottom on the left hand side it says funding level was 105% funded, which is great. That was the first valuation where the fund had just tipped into what we would call a sort of surplus position, which was great. Time's moved on, and we've heard earlier on today that the fund's now in a very healthy position, which is on the right hand side there. We can see that 140% funding level, which of course is great news. But as actuaries, we are sort of doom mongers, and we come along and we say it's great news, but caution does remain, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. But if we can move on, please, Kat. I'm not going to take you through every one of these items. This is just to show a sort of progression of how we've got from the left-hand side, which is where we were at 2022, which you can see it's a small blue wedge, which is a small surplus that we just talked about. And then there's different sort of pluses and negatives that have happened over the past 3 years. A lot of the things on the left-hand side are uneventful. The big pink, the big negative in the middle on the left-hand side, that's benefit increases. So as people will be aware, inflation ran very high for a couple of years. Pensions went up by 10.1 and then by 6.7. So of course, that's a big negative for the fund. And actually, if you get to the middle blue bar, what that says is if you just allowed for events that happened over the last 3 years, we would actually have a small deficit. Okay, so pound for pound, we're not really in a better position than we were 3 years ago. But then, as you see on the right-hand side, the big story of this valuation is all the assumptions that we're now making about the future. There's a positive outlook for inflation because that spike that happened just after 2022 is now in the past. And the big green wedge on the right-hand side, which is pretty much driving the entire surplus, is this view about the future, view about future investments. Now that's the bit where there's a lot of risk. That's the bit where there's a lot of caution. Yes, you would say, okay, the environment is different from 3 years ago, largely driven by global interest rates, which I'm sure we're all acutely aware of what's happened there over the past 3 years. And what that means is there's an expectation that we might be able to get better investment returns. Now that is an assumption, a promise about future returns. It's not guaranteed. And that's exactly why we're saying that there needs to be caution, there needs to be balance with everything that we're doing at this valuation. So just moving on, please, Kat, just to touch on very briefly what we do, and we'll talk more specifically about this at the session shortly after about employer rates. So what we do is we look at 3 steps. We say, what is the funding target? So this idea of, okay, how much money do we need to hold and how much money do we need to hold at a point in time in the future? So similar to the stuff that Bhulesh was touching on in his investment strategy, similar for the funding strategy, we're not interested in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We're interested in the long-term. Pensions is a very long-term funding thing to consider. So we run our models over a long period of time, which is the time horizon. And then crucially, and we'll talk again about a bit more about this in detail later, is about the likelihood of success. This idea of saying, how sure do we want to be that all these models that we run, how sure do we want to be that we're going to have enough money at the end of the day to pay everybody's pensions? Okay, and I can imagine if you're expecting a pension, similar to if you're expecting your wages at the end of the month, you want a high degree of certainty that you're going to get that money. Okay, so this is what we do with the likelihood of success, and we'll talk a bit about that. Sometimes we also call it prudence. Okay, Richard talked about those. Those mean the same thing. It's this chance, the chance of success within the models that we run. So just moving on then, Kat. I won't spend lots of time on this. This is probably the most technical slide. But all this is, the point in this is saying on the left-hand side, we start our models. In this example, we're 100% funded, very roughly where the fund was actually 3 years ago. And what we do is we run our models over a period of time. Now, each one of those squiggly lines represents a possible future. Okay, now in reality, when we run our models, there's 5,000 squiggly lines, right? Far too many to have on the chart. But the point being that the future's uncertain. Nobody's going to be able to predict what's going to happen even in a couple of weeks' time, sometimes let alone 20 years' time. So we run these models and we try to have a sufficient proportion of these potential future outcomes to be successful. Okay, yes, there is a few of the lines that actually fail the test. And you can see that they're, in 20 years' time, they're below and there's a deficit. But that's acceptable. That's an acceptable amount of downside risk. And the point being that you can't fund towards the worst case scenario because you'd put too much pressure on employers. But equally, you need to be aware of that downside risk and you need to set this balance between funding risk and affordability for contributions for employers. So we set that at the valuation. We'll talk more about this later. We set that at 80%. Okay, we set our models to have an 80% chance that the contributions that employers are paying is going to be enough. Okay, but on the flip side of that, that still means there's a 1 in 5 chance that those contributions aren't going to be enough. Okay, so there is always that balance of risk. So moving on, this is, I think we've just got a couple more and then appreciate we're slightly over here. So one of the other principles which has been a long time in the funding strategy, some of the council employers who I know are present today are aware of this. This is called stabilised approach. It speaks to the regulations have a desirability for stability in contributions. I can imagine most employers would also have a desirability for stability. And the idea being that if you're trying to set medium-term financial plans or budgets to any extent, it's helpful to know that your contribution rate might only go up or down by a small amount, okay, rather than big fluctuations, 10% one valuation, 30% the next valuation. That's the kind of thing that will cripple budgets. So the graph here just shows the red lines, which would be if you just looked at the markets and said what would be the rate, and each of those represents a valuation, and you can see the red lines would be quite volatile. And then the orange line that steps through the graph, that is the fund stabilization approach, which says, okay, we're going to follow market trends. So we're going to go up or down in gradual increments, but we're not going to follow market volatility. Okay, so it follows the direction of the markets, but it doesn't follow the sort of staccato nature of the markets. And we'll talk more about that later, but that's an overarching principle of stability, which is really, really key to the fund's funding strategy, and it's been in play for a number of cycles. And just lastly then, Kat, I think the final slide is just to, I'm sure the employers in the room will already be aware of this. We've talked about it a bit today. The two big themes of the valuation is funding positions are up, which is great. This is the case across the LGPS. And contribution rates on average are down. How much they've gone down will vary. Of course, different employers have their own funding profile. They have their own employees. They have their own history and circumstances. But in general, contribution rates are down across the board, which is a really, really good position. Like, this is a great valuation. We're talking about surplus management, which Richard said, and we'll talk a lot about that in the afternoon session. It's a good problem to have. Okay. Yes, it's something that there needs to be nuance to, but it's a great problem to have. So I think that's all we've got. Kat, I think just to, yes, that's everything we had, but welcome any questions at this stage.
Okay, thanks for that, Tom. Has anyone got any questions for Hymans, Robertson? Yeah.
Just some clarity, really, because you're going to go on to talk about the contributor contributions. A bit of a mouthful, that. But the difference between the 105 and the 140, you think would automatically flow through, that the contributions would go down by a similar amount, and that's not going to be the case, simply because of that fiduciary duty to ensure that there aren't great big swathes of increases and decreases, giving a more level, stable playing field over the longer period of time, accepting it's not a 1 year, it's 3 year, 5 year, 20 year. So it's just that expectation, really, around the huge swing, great story, but it doesn't necessarily transmit to being so great a difference in the level of contribution now, simply because we don't want big fluctuations, positive or negative, by overreacting to that great figure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, I mean, I know I'm not going to spend too long on this, but I think it's exactly the point that we're making, and we'll hopefully give a little bit more clarity to that with the employers this afternoon. But I think on this point that there's a lot of noise, if you want to call it that, in the external environment, and whether that's the mainstream media, the trade press, or otherwise. And it's that headline figure. The headline is, funding level is X. So, okay, everyone can have a contribution holiday. That's not what happens, right? And that's not Ian and the other officers' roles. It's not myself and Richard's roles. You have to have a long-term view. Okay, we're on this downward trajectory with rates, which is great. And we'll see if we can continue that trajectory in 3 years' time. But I think there is a lot of sensational reporting just now about funding levels. And it's right for the fund to have the cautious approach. And I think the chart that we just had on the stability, that is probably the most salient principle that the fund has in this space is to have those gradual changes and not overreact. This environment we're in is a very, very recent thing. What's happened in the past 3 years, it could easily revert. So you do need to be cautious. It's not helpful for anyone to just be sort of slashing rates and then hiking them up again in 3 years' time.
Thanks for that, Tom. Yeah. Has anyone else got any other points they want to make? No. Okay, so we're going to move on then. Thank you for that, both of you. So we're going to move on to item 8, which is the Local Pension Board Annual Report, which is this has been compiled by the Local Pension Board. It's in the agenda pack at pages 147 to 158. An update from the board's chairman, Mr. Manjit Singh Sahara, has also been published online. He has given his apologies for today, but the report gives a comprehensive update on what the board has been up to. So I'd recommend that scheme members have a read of that report. Particularly to note that the board has no concerns over the fund or its administration, and their oversight of issues such as McLeod and risk management and assurance continues. So we'll take this report as noted. So then we're going to move to item 9, which is the report of the Local Pension Committee employee representatives. A report of the employee representatives is on the agenda at pages 159 to 160, and I've been informed we'll take that as read. I just wonder, do any of the current staff representatives on the Local Pension Committee wish to add anything further? Nick?
All I'd like to add is, which sort of agrees with what the actuaries were talking about, was that there's this headline figure of 140% funding. But actually, compared to the last valuation, there's been virtually no change in the overall assets. It's the assumptions, particularly the rate of growth that the fund is expecting to make. That is the change. And that, as they said, could easily go back the other way. And I've been around long enough to know that 30 years ago, we had employer contributions of 5-6%, which proved to be, in retrospect, inadequate. And there were some London boroughs that actually had contribution holidays. And then it's taken 20-25 years to bring that back up with much bigger employer contributions as a result of underfunding it before. So I agree entirely, not reckless prudence, because I agree with the stepped approach within that. That is the right way to go through it, and not be just throw it away with a big, and then you will regret it afterwards. That's all I want to say.
Thanks for that, Nick. I think I actually joined the committee around the last valuation, and I just reiterate what you've just said. Not an awful lot's been changed since then, but we've suddenly had this massive growth. But equally, that growth could dissipate very quickly because we are reliant on markets and all of that. So we have to be. At the end of the day, it's about ensuring there's enough money to pay the liabilities, which is for people who are in the scheme, either existing pensioners or current employees who, when they get to retirement age or wish to take their pension, they make sure they get what they're legally entitled to. So we've got to make sure we've got the cash flow to coming through. So it's really important. But equally, employers are looking for some relief from the very high levels of contributions that they have been making, as you point out. And so there is a reduction that's been approved of 6%, I think, in the for the stabilised employers, as it's called. I'm sure the actuaries are going to go through that in a lot of detail later in the employers meeting. But no, I think it's a good point. Mr. Piper.
Thank you, Chair. In response to those comments about the prudence, I believe that the contributions are likely to be reduced to give an aim of 120% of funding so that we don't go into those dark, dismal days of the past.
Yeah, we did discuss this at the recent committee meeting. So I think that's covered in the employee rep. It is in the other reports, but I mean, it is in the employee reps report here as well. So I think we did have that discussion. But yeah, that's why, because we don't want to get suckered into going back to the having to put it all up again. Right, is there any other points on this at all? That being said, I'd like to pass on our thanks to Mr. Clive Pitt, who has been a member of the local pension committee as a scheme member representative for a number of years, and he's now decided to stand down. So we'd like to thank him for his contributions towards the meetings. So thank you. So we're going to move to item 10. So that this is the appointment of scheme member employee representative to the local pension committee. So there's one vacancy for this for an employee representative, and we've had one nomination for the position from Mr. Rupert Sims, who's sat over there, and the position will be held for a period of 3 years. And as there are no other nominations, Mr. Sims is duly appointed. Congratulations. There's a position for reserve scheme member employee representative. No one's come forward for that, so that'll remain as a vacancy, and unless, of course, someone wishes to come forward at a future point. So moving to item 11, appointment of scheme member employee representative to the local pension board. So this is so there's one employee representative post available, which is for a period of 3 years. We're also seeking a reserve representative. This post is for a period of 1 year. And should a vacancy occur over the year, the reserve employee representative will ask to take place the vacated position until the next AGM. So there have been 2 nominations, and so a ballot, yes, a vote will need to be taken. And you are asked to vote for the person you want to take up the main 3-year employee representative position. And Kat is coming round with ballot papers for all those people who are entitled to vote. And the person receiving the greatest number of votes will be elected to that post. It is intended that the person who receives the least number of votes if they are agreeable, will be offered the position of reserve employee representative for a period of 1 year. The vote is open to all those present who are members of the Leicestershire County Council Pension Fund, that is, active contributors, deferred members and pensioners. Does anyone have any questions? Well, that's good. So the nominations before you are Ritesh Chauhan and Andrew Stewart. I hope I've pronounced that name right. Thank you. You will each have in front of you statements from each nominee and a voting slip. If you haven't got a voting slip yet, please let Kat or Ian know. And if you can vote for the person you wish to appoint to the 3-year position, please pass your voting slips. I'll put them in the box, which Angie is coming around with, and then we'll count them. And I need a ballot paper as well, please. Thank you. Okay, thanks for that, everyone. I'm able to confirm that Andrew Stewart, you've been successfully elected as the employee representative on the pension board for the next 3 years. And Ritesh, you were obviously not successful, and so we'd offer you the position of reserve employee representative for a period of 1 year. It basically means if someone can't turn up for the meeting, then you stand in instead for them. Okay, that's that. Thank you very much. So move on to item 12, which is date of the next pension fund annual meeting, 2026. And I'm going to move that the date of the next pension fund annual meeting will be held on the 14th of December, 2026, and this date to be published on the fund's website. I will move to item 13, any other urgent items. As I mentioned earlier, there are no urgent items. officers will be available for a short period after the meeting closes if you have any questions. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Wish you all a happy Christmas and New Year, and now declare the meeting closed. Thank you.